My name is Zoe. And the night I discovered that my best friend of 15 years had been systematically destroying my life, while I slept peacefully in the apartment above our shared boutique, I was wearing the silk pajamas she had given me for my birthday. The irony wasn't lost on me later. She had been clothing me in my own funeral shroud. But before I tell you how I went from sleeping soundly above my dream business to standing in a boardroom, watching Lisa Chen sign papers that would steal everything I'd worked for, and how a box of dusty receipts in my father's garage became the weapon that brought down her entire empire of lies. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is for you right now, because this story doesn't just travel, it exposes the kind of betrayal that happens in broad daylight, behind smiles and shared lats. The sound that woke me wasn't unusual. Lisa had a key, and she often came in early to prep for big client appointments. What was unusual was hearing a second voice, deeper, masculine, familiar in a way that made my stomach clench before my mind could catch up. I checked my phone. 20:47 a.m. No appointments happened at 20:47 a.m. I slipped out of bed and padded barefoot to the top of the narrow staircase that connected my apartment to silk and steel, the boutique Lisa and I had built from nothing over the past 8 years. The voices were clearer now, floating up through the thin floor. The papers are ready. Tomorrow morning. She signs thinking it's the new lease agreement. Lisa's voice, but stripped of the warmth I'd heard every day for 15 years. And she won't read the fine print. The male voice belonged to David. My David. The man who had been telling me he loved me for 6 months. Who had a toothbrush in my bathroom upstairs, and whose laugh I'd been falling asleep to just hours before. Zoe's never been detail-oriented. That's why she needs me. Lisa's laugh was sharp, nothing like the giggle I knew. She'll see Lee's renewal, and sign where I tell her to sign. By noon tomorrow. I'll own 51% of everything, the business, the building. Even the apartment she's sleeping in right now. I gripped the railing so hard I could feel splinters embedding in my palm. 8 years. We had been equal partners for 8 years. 50-50 on everything. Profits, decisions, late-night crisis management when the boutique nearly went under during COVID. I had trusted her with my bank accounts, my business plans. My tears when my mother died last year. I had trusted her with David when I introduced them at our anniversary party 3 months ago. What about the existing partnership agreement? David asked. Won't that protect her? David, baby. You're thinking like someone who actually cares about legal details. The endearment hit me like a physical blow. The partnership agreement expires tomorrow. I've been managing the renewal process, and Zoe signed off on letting me handle it weeks ago. She's been so distracted with her grief therapy, and trying to find herself, that she hasn't looked at a business document in months. They were right about that. After Mom died, I had checked out. Lisa had stepped up, taking over the administrative side, while I focused on design and client relationships. I had been grateful, I had thanked her. Once you own the majority, then what? David's voice was closer now, right below me. Then I make the decisions. And my first decision will be offering Zoe a generous severance package in exchange for her remaining shares. She can take the money and go find herself somewhere else. And if she doesn't want to sell. Lisa's pause lasted long enough for my heart to beat 5 times. Then I guess she'll learn what it feels like to be an employee in her own business. Minimum wage, no creative input, no access to financials. She'll break eventually. They always do. I heard movement, footsteps, the soft sound of papers shuffling. Then Lisa's voice again, but different now, softer, flirtier. Come here, baby. Let's celebrate early. The sound that followed made me clamp my hand over my mouth to keep from screaming. It wasn't just betrayal. It was the enthusiastic, practiced betrayal of 2 people who had clearly been doing this for a while. In my store, below my apartment. While I slept in pajamas my best friend had bought me, and dreamed about the future. I thought I was building with the man who was currently kissing her in the dark. I don't remember walking back to my bedroom. I don't remember sitting on my bed or staring at my phone, or trying to make sense of what I'd heard. What I remember is the sudden, crystal clear understanding that everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie. But what Lisa and David didn't know was that my mother had raised me to be prepared for wolves in sheep's clothing. And what they definitely didn't know was that my father was a retired forensic accountant who had spent 30 years teaching small business owners how to protect themselves from exactly the kind of thing that was happening to me right now. I didn't call him at 3 a.m. I didn't cry or scream or throw things. I sat in the dark and planned. By morning I had made 3 decisions. First, I would let them think their plan was working. Second, I would document everything. And third, I would give them exactly enough rope to hang themselves with. I came downstairs at 8 a.m. wearing my usual Tuesday outfit. Jeans and the silk and steel branded shirt Lisa had designed for us last year. I made coffee for 3, humming softly, playing the role of the oblivious friend who had no idea her world was about to crumble. Morning, beautiful. David kissed my cheek when he arrived at 8:30, right on schedule. He had developed a habit of stopping by on his way to work, usually grabbing coffee and flirting with both Lisa and me in the easy, charming way that had first caught my attention. Now I understood why he flirted with Lisa. I also understood why she had encouraged it. Sleep well? Lisa asked, emerging from the back office with a stack of papers in her hand. The papers, I realized. The ones that would sign my life away. Like a baby. I said, meeting her eyes with a smile. What's all that? Just the lease renewal stuff we talked about. The landlord wants everything finalized today, remember? I didn't remember, because we had never talked about it. But I nodded anyway. Where do I sign? Lisa's smile was warm and familiar, the same smile that had convinced me to go into business with her, to lend her money when her credit was bad, to trust her with everything that mattered to me. Let me just review everything one more time, she said, settling at the small table we used for client consultations. You know how paranoid I get about legal stuff. I watched her flip through pages, occasionally making small marks with her pen. She was being thorough, making sure every detail was perfect for the moment when she stole my life. David, honey, could you grab me a pen from the desk? She called out. This one's running out of ink. David obliged, leaning over her shoulder to hand her the pen. Their fingers brushed. She smiled up at him, he smiled back. It was a small moment. Intimate and natural, the kind of moment that only happens between people who are comfortable with each other's bodies. People who have been touching each other in the dark. Okay, Zoe, Lisa said, straightening the papers. Just need your signature on pages 3, 7, and 12. Standard lease renewal stuff, term length, rent increases, maintenance responsibilities. I picked up the pen she offered me and flipped to page 3. The document was dense, full of legal language that would have required careful reading to fully understand. Which was exactly what she was counting on. But my father hadn't raised a fool. I read every word. The document wasn't a lease renewal. It was a partnership restructuring agreement that would transfer controlling interest of Silk and Steel to Lisa Chen in exchange for my retirement from active management and transition to silent partner status. By signing, I would be agreeing to step back from all business operations while Lisa assumed full control of day-to-day decisions, financial management, and strategic planning. In other words, I would be signing away my voice in the business I had built, keeping only the right to receive whatever profits Lisa decided I deserved. I flipped to page 7. There it was, the clause that would allow Lisa to buy out my remaining shares at fair market value, as determined by an independent assessor of her choosing. She would control the assessment process, which meant she would control what my life's work was worth. Page 12 was the final insult. It included a non-compete clause that would prevent me from opening any similar business within 50 miles for 5 years. She wasn't just stealing my present, she was making sure I couldn't build a future. This is pretty comprehensive, I said, keeping my voice light, lot more detailed than our original partnership agreement. Lisa shrugged. Landlords are getting more demanding these days. Insurance requirements, liability clauses, all that corporate stuff. She was lying so smoothly, so naturally, that I wondered how many other lies I had believed over the years. How many times had she smiled at me while calculating how to destroy me? Well, I said, clicking the pen. I trust you completely. I signed Zoe Martinez on page 3 with a flourish. I signed on page 7 with a steady hand. I signed on page 12 with a smile. Lisa's relief was visible. Her shoulders relaxed, her smile became genuine, and she actually laughed with delight. Perfect, she said, gathering the papers. I'll get these to the landlord today, and we'll be all set for another year. Another year of her owning my life, she meant. Actually, I said, could I get copies for my records? My dad always told me to keep copies of everything. For the first time, Lisa hesitated. Oh, you don't need to worry about that. I'll handle all the administrative stuff, like always. I know, but humor me, you know how paranoid dads can be. Lisa's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course. I'll make copies later and drop them off. Thanks. I stood up and stretched. I think I'm going to take the morning off, actually. Maybe drive out to see Dad. I've been meaning to go through some of Mom's things in the garage. That sounds nice, Lisa said, but she was looking at David, not at me. Take all the time you need. I bet she thought I would. The drive to my father's house in Riverside took 45 minutes, but I called him before I left the city. Papa, I need your help. And I need you to pull out every business document you ever kept for me and Lisa. Midja, what happened? I just signed papers that gave away my business. And I did it on purpose. There was a long pause. Then my father's voice, sharp and focused in the way I remembered from childhood, when he was working on a particularly complex case. How long do we have? I don't know. But I think they're moving fast. Then get here fast. And Zoe, don't trust anyone until this is over. Not anyone. My father had been preparing for this conversation my entire life, even though neither of us knew it. When I arrived at his house, he already had 3 boxes of documents, spread across the dining room table. Everything from our original partnership agreement, to receipts for equipment purchases, to copies of loan applications, from when we'd first started the business. Your mother always said I was too paranoid, he said, opening the first box. But when you're dealing with other people's money, paranoia keeps you honest. We spent 2 hours going through everything, building a timeline of the business from day one. What we found wasn't just evidence of Lisa's recent betrayal, it was evidence of systematic fraud going back years. Look at this. My father said, pulling out a folder labeled, Business Loan 2019. Inside were copies of documents I had never seen before. This is the application for the expansion loan. The one that let you lease the bigger space downtown. I recognized the loan. It had been a turning point for the business, giving us the capital to move from our tiny original location to the beautiful storefront where we operated now. Lisa had handled all the paperwork, working with the bank to get us approved despite my limited credit history. But according to the documents in my father's files, the loan hadn't been approved for both of us, it had been approved for Lisa alone, based on financial statements that listed her as the sole proprietor of Silk and Steel. I never signed this, I said, staring at the application. And look at this financial statement. It shows the business income for the previous 2 years, but it only lists Lisa's name. Like I don't exist. My father put on his reading glasses and studied the documents. Is signature. It's supposed to be yours. I looked at the bottom of the loan application, where my name was signed in handwriting that looked like mine, but wasn't quite right. The Z in Zoe was too angular. The M in Martinez was missing the small flourish I always added. She forged my signature, I said quietly. She forged my signature, and took out a business loan without telling me. And used it to lease a property that's now entirely in her name. My father added, pulling out the lease agreement for our current location. Look at this, Mija. You're not on this lease at all. According to these documents, you're not a partner in this business. You're an employee who happens to live upstairs. The implications hit me like a physical blow. If I wasn't on the lease, I had no legal right to the storefront. If I wasn't a co-signer on the business loan, I had no legal claim to the assets we'd purchased with that money. And if Lisa had been filing taxes and legal documents, listing herself as the sole proprietor, then legally speaking, I might not have any claim to the business at all. She's been planning this for years, I whispered. This isn't about the lease renewal. This is about covering her tracks. My father nodded grimly. And if you hadn't overheard them last night, you would have signed those papers thinking you were renewing a lease, but actually you would have been acknowledging that you were never a partner to begin with. But we kept digging. What we found got worse. In 2020, when the pandemic hit and small businesses were struggling, Lisa had applied for multiple federal relief loans on behalf of a Silk and Steel. But according to the applications, she was the only owner and she had listed me as a part-time employee making minimum wage. She had received over $80 in PPP loans based on those false statements. In 2021, she had refinanced the business loan at a better interest rate. Again, as the sole owner, using financial statements that dramatically understated my contributions to the business. In 2022, she had taken out a line of credit to purchase inventory for our holiday season. The credit line was secured against business assets that, according to the paperwork, belonged entirely to her. She's been stealing from you for years, my father said. And she's been using your labor and your designs to build a business empire that exists entirely in her name. But the worst discovery was in the last box. Tucked between old receipts and tax forms was a folder I had never seen before, labeled, Partnership Dissolution. Template. Inside were draft legal documents dated 6 months ago, long before my mother's death. Long before my supposed emotional breakdown that had made me unreliable. The documents outlined a plan for Lisa to buy out my share of the business at a drastically reduced valuation, citing my decreased contribution and lack of business acumen as justification for the low offer. She had been planning to get rid of me since last winter. Everything else, the concern about my grief, the offer to handle administrative tasks, the introduction to David, had been part of a carefully orchestrated plan to make me feel dependent on her, while she legally erased me from the business we had built together. Papa, I said, what do I do? He was quiet for a long moment, studying the papers spread across the table. Then he reached for his phone. I'm calling my old partner, Carmen Rodriguez. She specializes in business fraud now, and then I'm calling my friend at the FBI White-Collar Crime Division, the FBI. Mija, this isn't just betrayal. This is federal crime, bank fraud, loan fraud, tax fraud, identity theft, conspiracy. She's been running a criminal enterprise. And you've been her unknowing front. While my father made his calls, I sat at his kitchen table and tried to process the magnitude of what had been done to me. For years, I had thought I was building a partnership. Instead, I had been funding Lisa's solo business venture, while she systematically erased me from the legal record. But what she didn't know was that I had my father's DNA. And my father didn't just keep records, he kept everything. Every receipt, every contract, every email. Every bank statement from the day we had first shaken hands on our partnership agreement, to the moment I had signed away rights I didn't legally have anyway. Carmen wants to meet with you tomorrow, my father said, returning to the table. And Agent Morrison from the Bureau is very interested in those loan applications. Apparently, they've been investigating PPP loan fraud, and Lisa's applications match the pattern they've been tracking. What happens now? Now you go home and act normal. Don't let them know you know anything. Let them think their plan is working. And whatever you do, don't confront them directly. We need them to make the next move while we're watching. That night, I did exactly what my father told me. I went home, made dinner, and waited for David to come over like he always did on Tuesday nights. When he arrived at 7 with takeout from our favorite Thai place, I greeted him with a kiss and acted like everything was normal. How was your day, beautiful? He asked, settling onto my couch like he belonged there. Pretty good. Signed the lease renewal this morning, spent the afternoon with my dad going through some of Mom's things. That must have been emotional. It was, but good. You know how it is. Sometimes you find things that help you understand the past better. David smiled and pulled me closer. I'm proud of you for taking care of all that business stuff. I know it's not really your thing. Not my thing. As if the business I had built from nothing was some kind of administrative chore I was too delicate to handle. Lisa's so good at that stuff, I said. I'm lucky to have her as a partner. You really are. David agreed, kissing the top of my head. She's been such a good friend to you. Especially since your mom passed. Such a good friend. While he was comforting me about my mother's death, he had been sleeping with the woman who was systematically stealing everything my mother had helped me build. We watched a movie. We made love in my bed. He fell asleep in my arms. And I lay awake listening to his breathing and planning exactly how I was going to destroy both of them. The next morning, I met with Carmen Rodriguez in her downtown office. She was sharp, efficient, and furious on my behalf. This is one of the most systematic cases of business partner fraud I've seen, she said after reviewing the documents my father had compiled. The forged signatures alone are enough for criminal charges, but the loan fraud and tax evasion make this a federal case. What are my options? Legally, you have several paths. We can file a civil lawsuit for fraud, theft, and breach of fiduciary duty. We can report the criminal activity to the appropriate authorities, and let them handle prosecution. Or we can do both simultaneously. What would you recommend? Carmen smiled, and for the first time since I'd overheard Lisa's plan, I felt hope. I recommend we let them complete their fraud, while we document everything. The papers you signed yesterday don't actually give Lisa control of anything, because she never had legal authority to create that agreement in the first place. But if she acts on it, if she actually tries to take control of the business, lock you out, or force you to sell your shares, she'll be committing additional crimes while we're watching. So I should let her think she won. For now, let her show her hand completely, and in the meantime, we'll be building an airtight case that will not only get you your business back, but make sure she never has the opportunity to do this to anyone else. I spent the next week living in a strange kind of limbo. During the day, I worked at the boutique as if nothing had changed, smiling at customers and collaborating with Lisa on upcoming designs. In the evenings, I had dinner with David, and listened to him talk about his day, while he lied to my face about where he'd been, and who he'd been with. But I was also documenting everything. I photographed every document in the office when Lisa stepped out. I recorded conversations where she made decisions for both of us, without actually consulting me. I made copies of client lists, supplier contracts, and financial statements. What I found confirmed Carmen's assessment. The business that Lisa thought she had legally stolen from me didn't actually exist in the way she believed. The loan she had taken out in her name alone. It was secured against assets that we had purchased together before the loan existed, which meant she had no legal right to pledge them as collateral. The lease she had signed as sole proprietor. It was for a space we had modified extensively using my design skills and my financial contributions, which meant I had a legitimate claim to the improvements we had made. Most importantly, the original partnership agreement we had signed 8 years ago was still legally valid. Lisa's forged documents might have confused the paper trail, but they didn't actually dissolve our partnership or transfer my ownership rights to her. She had been so focused on erasing me from new documents that she had forgotten to actually nullify the old ones. Which meant that, legally speaking, everything she thought she now owned actually still belonged to both of us. The trap was set. Now we just had to wait for her to walk into it. That happened on Friday afternoon. Exactly 1 week after I had signed the fake lease renewal. "Zoe, could you come into the back office for a minute?" Lisa called out during our usual afternoon lull. "I need to talk to you about something important." I followed her to the small office space behind the retail floor, where she had spread out a new set of papers across the desk. "Sit down," she said, her tone serious. "I've been thinking about our conversation last week, about the lease renewal and everything, and I realize I wasn't completely transparent with you about the terms. Here it comes, I thought. The landlord is requiring some changes to our business structure as a condition of the new lease. Specifically, he wants a single point of contact for all building-related issues. Someone who can make decisions quickly, without having to consult multiple partners." I nodded, playing the part of the confused friend who trusted her completely. "I know this is a lot to ask, but I think it makes sense for me to take on that role. I've been handling most of the administrative stuff anyway, and you've been so focused on the creative side. Plus, with everything you've been dealing with since your mom passed." She trailed off, letting me fill in the blanks about my supposed emotional instability. "What exactly are you saying?" "Lisa, I'm saying I think it would be best for everyone if you stepped back from the business side of things and focused on what you do best. Design and client relationships. You'd still be a partner, of course, but more of a silent partner. I would handle the day-to-day operations, financial management, vendor relationships, all of that, and in exchange, you'd have complete creative freedom and a guaranteed income without having to worry about profit margins, or tax deadlines, or any of the stressful stuff that's been overwhelming you." She was offering me exactly what I had already signed away the week before, but presenting it as if it were a new idea designed to help me rather than destroy me. "I don't know, Lisa. We've been equal partners for 8 years. I know, and that's worked great. But we're not the same people we were 8 years ago. You're an artist, Zoe. You shouldn't have to worry about business details. And honestly, I think the stress of trying to manage both sides has been affecting your work." The implication was clear. I was failing as a business partner, and she was offering me a graceful way to step down before I failed completely. What kind of guaranteed income are we talking about? Lisa's smile was warm and reassuring. I was thinking $40,000 a year, plus health insurance. That's more than most senior designers make at other boutiques. And you'd have complete job security. $40,000 a year for the business I had built. The business that generated over $300,000 in annual revenue. She was offering me roughly 13% of what the company made, in exchange for giving up my ownership of everything. I need to think about this, I said. Of course. But Zoe, I do need an answer by Monday. The landlord is getting impatient, and I don't want to risk losing our location. I stood up, smoothing down my skirt and trying to look overwhelmed by the decision. Can I take the paperwork home? I want to read through everything carefully. For just a moment, Lisa hesitated, then she handed me the documents. Sure, but remember this is confidential for now. We don't want to worry our employees or clients until everything is finalized. I nodded and took the papers. What Lisa didn't know was that the moment I walked out of the office, Carmen Rodriguez would have copies of every page, and by Monday morning, we'd be ready to spring our trap. That weekend, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went away. I told Lisa I was driving up the coast to clear my head and think about her offer. I told David I needed space to process everything that was happening with the business. What I actually did was check into a hotel in Santa Barbara and spend 2 days with Carmen and her team, planning exactly how to destroy the woman who had been systematically destroying me. She's given us everything we need, Carmen said, reviewing the documents Lisa had handed me. This contract doesn't just prove she's been defrauding you. It proves she knows she's been defrauding you. She's offering you a job in your own business, which means she understands that legally, you still own half of it. So what's our next move? Monday morning. You're going to accept her offer. You're going to walk into that office and tell her you're grateful for her generosity, and you can't wait to focus on the creative side of the business. You're going to sign her contract with enthusiasm. But won't that make everything worse? Carmen smiled. Zoe, that contract is evidence of criminal conspiracy. The moment she accepts your signature, she's documented her intent to defraud you in writing. And the moment she acts on it, the moment she actually tries to take control of the business, or exclude you from financial decisions, she's committing fraud while we're recording everything. You want her to hang herself. I want her to hang herself with rope she braided personally. Monday morning, I walked into Silk and Steel, with a smile on my face and gratitude in my voice. I've been thinking about your offer all weekend, I told Lisa. And you're absolutely right. I'm not cut out for the business side of things. I'd love to focus on design and let you handle everything else. Lisa's relief was visible and immediate. Oh Zoe, I'm so glad. I was worried you might feel like I was pushing you out. Not at all. I think this will be perfect for both of us. I signed her contract with a flourish, using the same pen she had given me the week before, and as I signed, I thought about the recording device in my purse. The federal agents who would be listening to this conversation within hours, and the look that would be on Lisa's face when she realized what I had done to her. But the real satisfaction came later that afternoon, when David stopped by the boutique for his usual visit and found Lisa in the office, celebrating. It's done, she told him, not knowing I was in the back room, filing inventory reports and listening to every word. She signed everything. As of today, I control the business completely. And she doesn't suspect anything. David, she thanked me for being such a good friend. She actually thinks I'm doing her a favor. They laughed together, and I heard the sound of movement, clothing, intimate contact. They were celebrating by making love in my office. In the business I had built, while I was 20 feet away doing the design work that generated the revenue they were stealing. But what they didn't know was that their celebration was being recorded by the FBI, that every bank account Lisa had access to was being monitored, and that in exactly 72 hours, their entire world was going to collapse. The end came faster than I had expected. On Thursday morning, I arrived at the boutique to find federal agents waiting outside with search warrants. Not for me, for Lisa, who was inside the office, frantically trying to shred documents. Zoo Martinez. Agent Morrison approached me as I stood on the sidewalk, watching through the window as Lisa's carefully constructed fraud was dismantled in real time. Wes. We're executing a search warrant in connection with bank fraud and identity theft charges against Lisa Chen. You're not under investigation, but we need you to stay outside while we secure the premises. I nodded, pulling out my phone to call Carmen. But before I could dial, the office door opened and Lisa emerged in handcuffs, her face white with shock and rage. When she saw me standing there, she stopped walking. You, she said, her voice flat and cold. You did this. I didn't do anything, Lisa. You did this to yourself. I built this business. I made it successful. You were just dead weight. And you know it. Funny thing about that, I said, stepping closer so she could hear me clearly. Turns out, when you forge someone's signature on loan documents, you don't actually transfer ownership to yourself. You just create evidence of criminal fraud. Lisa's eyes widened as the implications hit her. You knew. You knew when you signed the contracts. I knew when you offered me $40,000 for a business that was never yours to sell. As they led her toward the federal vehicle, she turned back one more time. David will never stay with you. Not when he finds out what you really are. David's being arrested too, I said calmly. Conspiracy to commit fraud is a federal crime, and conspiracy charges are based on planning, not success. I watched the federal vehicle disappear around the corner, taking with it the woman who had spent years systematically stealing my life. Then I walked into my boutique, according to the legal documents that Carmen had filed that morning, and called my father. It's over, Pap. How do you feel, Mija? I looked around the space I had designed, at the inventory I had selected, at the client photos covering the walls, pictures of women wearing clothes I had created for the most important days of their lives. I feel like myself again. The legal aftermath took months, but the criminal case was ironclad. Lisa pled guilty to 16 federal charges including bank fraud, identity theft, tax evasion, and conspiracy. She was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution, which, given the money she had stolen and the interest that had accumulated, meant she would be paying me for the rest of her life. David pled guilty to conspiracy charges and received 2 years in federal prison. I never spoke to him again. But I heard from mutual friends that he spent most of his sentence insisting he had been manipulated by Lisa and had never intended to hurt me. Maybe that was true. Maybe he really believed he was just following her lead. But intention doesn't matter when the result is the systematic destruction of someone's life. What mattered was that I had learned something I wouldn't have believed a year ago. I was strong enough to fight back. Not with screaming or tears or dramatic confrontations, but with patience, preparation, and the kind of cold, calculated strategy that my father had taught me and my mother had modeled. Lisa had counted on my trust, my grief, my willingness to let other people handle the details of my own life. She had been right about all of that. Until the moment I stopped trusting and started verifying. 6 months later, I was running Silk and Steel as the sole proprietor, something I had never imagined I would want to do. But it turned out that I was much better at the business side than anyone had given me credit for. When you're not being sabotaged by your partner, when you're not funding someone else's fraud, when you actually have access to your own company's financial records, running a business is considerably easier. The boutique thrived. I hired 2 new designers and a business manager who reported directly to me. I opened a second location. I started designing for clients in New York and Los Angeles. I did all of this while Lisa sat in federal prison, probably still wondering how the woman she had dismissed as dead weight had outmaneuvered her so completely. But the real victory wasn't the success of the business, or the money I recovered, or even the satisfaction of seeing Lisa face consequences for her crimes. The real victory was simpler than that. I had been betrayed by the 2 people I trusted most in the world. I had been systematically robbed, lied to, and manipulated for years. I had been made to feel like I was failing at the most important thing in my life. And I had survived it. More than survived it. I had fought back and won. The girl who used to let other people make the important decisions was gone. In her place was a woman who read every document, verified every claim, and trusted her own judgment above all else. The girl who used to believe that love meant never questioning your partner's motives was gone too. In her place was a woman who understood that real love doesn't require you to close your eyes. I still design clothes for women on the most important days of their lives. But now I also design something else. I design boundaries. I design systems that protect what I've built. I design relationships based on transparency rather than trust. And when young women come into my boutique, wearing engagement rings and talking excitedly about their wedding day, I don't just help them choose a dress. I also, very quietly, make sure they understand the importance of reading every document before they sign it. Because sometimes the person who smiles the brightest, while they're destroying your life, is the same person who taught you to trust them completely. And sometimes the only way to save yourself is to become the kind of person who would never have needed saving in the first place. Did you like this story? Tell us in the comments which city you're listening from. If you enjoyed this dramatic tale of betrayal and resurrection, please support us with a super thanks, so we can continue bringing you more incredible life stories like this one. Thank you so much for your support. We look forward to your comments about Zoe's amazing journey. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that we highly recommend. There's so much more content on our channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story, with love and respect.